So some of you already went to church and you've heard this story, and others of you are going to church in a little while. So I want to help you get into the story of Lazarus, and I'm going to divide it up into scenes because it really divides nicely into scenes. This is 44 verses long, so it would take a very long time to read the whole thing. So the first scene is really John is setting the scene where Jesus hears from Martha and Mary that Lazarus is very sick. But Jesus has been in Judea and they threatened to kill him. So he tarries, you might say, where he is and stays there 2 additional days before he heads back to a different Bethany where Mary and Martha live. And then there's this whole conversation with the disciples who are wondering what's going on and why he's bothering to head back to Judea to get killed. And then he goes into Bethany, which is the village where Mary and Martha live. And Martha comes out to greet him. She hears that he's on the way. And Martha says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So if he'd come right when they called her, Lazarus would still be alive. And then Martha goes back and gets Mary, and Jesus is there talking with all the other people in the village who've come out. This is an event to have Jesus come. And then Mary comes out and she says, Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would still be alive. And then Jesus says, well, where have you put him? And they go to the tomb, and he calls out to Lazarus and says, in the old style, come forth. And in the new style, come out. Now, they're just 2 different translations. So Lazarus, you remember last week the healing of the blind man? Mm-hmm. Jesus spat on the ground and made a mud thing and applied it to his eyes, and then he was healed. But with Lazarus, Jesus just says, come forth or come out. And then Lazarus, who's all bound up, and he's been dead 4 days now, so the stench is growing. Comes out, and there's a group of Pharisees there and a group of villagers there, and people are holding their noses and people are murmuring or chatting about what's going on. And Mary and Martha are relieved. The verses are greatly relieved. The verses here that have stood out for me are, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I don't know if any of you have had an if only situation in your life. But I grew up hearing about an if only situation in my father's life. His father was a missionary to Madagascar and died of typhoid fever in 1940. And over and over and over, when my dad was just 15, he played out this scene. If only the Malagasy doctor had stayed taking care of Papa, if only they hadn't changed the drugs, if only Grandma hadn't, trimmed his mustache, then he wouldn't have gotten foreign object pneumonia and Papa would still be alive. So for everyone who's had an if only, this is a story for you. So let's start. Do you all get the story now and the power of the story? This is a painting by Edvard Munch, a Norwegian artist, called By the Deathbed, that he did in 1893, same year that Brooklyn Bridge was finished. And this was inspired by the death of his sister, Sophie Johanna, of tuberculosis in 1877. And I found this painting on a wonderful website done by Vanderbilt University Divinity School that has the lectionary series and artwork that's attached to the text. And so this artwork, the text attached to this text was Psalm 130. And Psalm 130 is a famous psalm, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read just one verse. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than those who watch for the morning, more than those who watch for the morning. The worst things, if you're taking care of a sick kid, if you're sick yourself, it's always at night that the worst things are happening. When it's dark and you're scared and you can't get anybody on the phone. So this is a deathbed scene, and it's done in the Impressionistic style. Munch is just back from Paris, and he's met and seen artworks by Gauguin, by Toulouse-Lautrec, Van Gogh. So he's used to use color. He's learned to use color in a different manner. What do you notice about the painting, and how does it affect you? Yeah, the red is a very, very powerful color. What else about the people? Yeah, their eyes are.
There's sorrow in their faces.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Yeah.
Sorrow in their faces, but my thing there too is the women's faces are white.
Yeah.
And the gentleman red. I wonder why.
Yeah, and I have no idea. Munch's life was greatly affected by insanity, illness, and death. And he always felt in his life that the darkness of death was very, very close to him. He's what you would call a gloomy Norwegian. Best life story here was a gloomy day, and Nicholas was a happy day. Danes come in two varieties, the happy and the sad. Norwegians are mostly gloomy. What do you notice about this? Yeah, and I need Anne, okay.
Deanne.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting how the left side of the frame is has more color, but yet since it's so flat, it's devoid of life and animation, and the right side, even though it's so dark, maybe to match the mood, is upright and pretty and full.
Yeah, Mark.
Well, the deceased, the sister, is it of Monk? Is, you don't see the face, you just see the top of the head, and I think it's kind of a very respectful, reverent image of the dead person. And I have to say, this reminds me right away, if the age is about right, I think she was a great aunt whose grave I see at the small town cemetery in Kansas, who died of tuberculosis at age 23, I think was her age. And the guy she was engaged to, or maybe even married to, became a famous rodeo operator in Kansas City. And I just found that out. Anyway, yeah, such a young, age to be taken. Such a loss.
Tuberculosis was a major problem in the late 19th, even into the early 20th century. Huge number of deaths of TB until they got antibiotics to help cure people. We also notice that it's a foreshortened frame. There's not much background here. There's just the deathbed and the grieving relatives. And then the red closes it off very close. One thing I noticed immediately about the painting is the bed. The bed frame is very typical of Norwegian houses. My great grandmother, Alina, had one pretty much just like this in her house up in a little island just south of the Lofoten Islands. I think it's a very, very powerful piece of art, and it will help us see the difference just between the deathbed scene and then really these raising from the dead of Lazarus and what it means to have Jesus come. Shall we go on? There is no Jesus here. We're still in Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry to thee is the first line of that song. There's a wonderful hymn by Martin Luther in the hymnal. It's number 600. If you'd care to take a look. So let's move on. We have another scene from Duccio, whom I'm really enjoying this year. So you've seen probably more Duccio than you ever wanted to. What do you notice here?
You see Lazarus. Yeah, you see his face.
Yeah, you do see Lazarus. Thank you, Alan. You see his face. But it is a little bit of a mystery as to how he got up and walked out. So the physicality doesn't seem to be greatly expressed there.
There was supposed to have been a stone.
Yeah, there's supposed to have been a stone, and here is the stone. Right there, and this gentleman's holding it. Okay, and then the people close are holding their noses because of the stench. And this is Mary, and this is Martha. This is Jesus, and this is Peter, Saint Peter. That's sort of the way, we'll see a lot of these scenes in a row, so you get to sort of notice the characters and see what their distinguishing marks are. What do you notice about Jesus?
Halo.
Yeah, the halo, the ample use of gold. And this once again is from the predella in Siena, which was 16 feet tall. So it's a mammoth piece of art. And this is only a portion of it that's in Fort Worth. But he has his hand out. And that's typical of every scene that we'll look at of the raising of Lazarus is Jesus with his hand out. Yes, Jenny.
We were just in the Holy Land in January and we saw some tombs and they were just caves dug into stone and very simple, very small, much smaller than I ever imagined this would look like. But the stone was maybe 4 feet, 5 feet circle that rolled in front of the door and would just lean against it. I don't know if they sealed it, but there was nothing that looked anything like that. So it's interesting.
Coffin.
Yeah, that looks like a standing up coffin. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, he's very Sienese. He's never been to the Holy Land. So he's painting what he knows. There's this gospel text sort of comes in a number of scenes. There's the chatting with Jesus, or the summons back. There's the discussion with the disciples. There's the traveling back to Bethany and the beseeching the women fall on their knees. That is stated in the gospel very clearly that Mary fell to her knees to beseech Jesus. So here is Mary, and then there is Lazarus. So in some ways, and then here are all the people. The disciples are on this side. This is all the people from the neighborhood who are chit-chatting or murmuring and discussing what to do with Jesus, the Pharisees. How many scenes of that gospel? It's a long text, 44 verses, has Duccio captured here? Well, just one. Yeah, okay, Ingrid?
Yeah, I would say at least two, because you've got the two sisters like asking Jesus or talking to him and saying, you know, if you had been here, our brother wouldn't have died, which according to the text happened one and then the other, not simultaneously, but they're both here. And then, of course, the scene where he calls Lazarus come out. So depending on how you're dividing up scenes, that's at least two to three, yeah.
So that's, yes, Mary? Let's wait for Jenny to get over there.
In our text also, Jesus has wept. I wonder if there was any at all in the painting where Jesus might be weeping.
Yeah, and I have not
Even
seen,
in different stories is what. I'm
yeah.
saying.
Well, that's the shortest verse in the entire Bible, and Jesus wept. In case you ever play trivia and you need to know the right answer to that one. In all of these paintings or representations of this scene, Jesus looks serious. He always has his hand stretched out, but I have not seen a picture of him or a representation of him crying.
I also would like to point out that some cultures, we don't find dead people, and that is really very striking as far as I am.
Yeah, that's a,
And also the theological part, the unbinding. I would like to wait if there's a scene of that where the people would start unbinding the.
there is a picture of that coming up in a couple slides by a very, very famous Italian painter. That's very striking. Actually, it's by two very famous Italian painters. Well, okay, so let's move on. This is one of Duccio's contemporaries. This is Giotto, who's an incredibly famous painter or artist. And this is a fresco, and the size, the picture before was quite small, whereas in real life, this picture or this fresco was quite large. And that was part of an altarpiece. And this is part of the decoration of an entire church, and I have a photo of it to show you next. The whole church is frescoed by Giotto and his workshop. It's one of the most stunningly beautiful things I've ever seen. It's a UNESCO heritage site.
I forgot what a fresco is.
A fresco is when they paint on the plaster. So you can't go back, you're painting on wet plaster, partially dried wet plaster. It's like Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Last Judgment, those are frescoes. So this is a fresco, a whole frescoed church by Giotto that was part of a monastery, an Augustinian monastery. At one time, let me see the town. This is in Padua. So we've changed locations. Giotto works in Padua and Duccio in Siena. We have a different color scheme.
Yes.
Yeah, it sort of had me at blue skies, which I've been missing here in California. What do you notice here?
The colors are more muted.
Yes, Diane, the colors are more muted, okay? Well, the Giotto is working with a huge scale because he's doing a whole interior of the church. But the colors are definitely more muted than in the Duccio. And the halos are not gold. I don't know if you can apply gold leaf to wet plaster. That's a technical question I don't know the answer to.
And there are three of them. Four.
Yeah, there are 4 halos here. What do you notice about the fabrics? The fabrics, yeah, look to be Italian and they look to be patterned. And they look to be fairly expensive fabrics. So that's a change from where we were with Duccio. Giotto has brought in more colors. And once again, we have these 2 groups. We have Jesus and the disciples on this side, and we have the Pharisees and and Lazarus, who's not unbound at all there. And then the two women, and then here are the guys who are holding the stone. Yeah, John?
Yeah, so,
Oh, sorry, Mark was first, okay.
Well, consistent with the last one, there are trees in the scene, I like that. But also it looks like two women on the right have facial coverings, and I don't know if that was just the custom or the smell again.
And I'm not sure if that was the custom or the smell, but I do like the fabrics. Clothes get me every time. Yes, John?
Yeah, so there's the man in the middle who interests me. I'm not really sure who he is. He has a halo and he has a kind of a cream colored top and the multicolored skirt.
And I don't know who he would be either.
He seems to be in an argument with the man in green.
Yeah, so he looks to be a disciple, and the man in green is part of the Pharisee group. This would generally be considered Peter. He's got the long white beard. He's the oldest of the disciples. Yeah, Alan?
I had a question about the same thing, in that in both paintings, the person standing next to Lazarus, like, are in gold. And in this painting, it has a halo. Is there someone maybe traditionally that I'm missing from the story?
Well, let me see what I can find out about that. There was nothing in the art history, art criticism, things that I was able to locate to find out about that. So I'll have to check into that and report back next week. Next week, we have two also incredibly beautiful scenes from both Duccio and Giotto of this Palm Sunday procession into Jerusalem, that are humorous in a way, that's really sort of fun to see. Yeah. And once again, you get these dramatic hills in the back of these Italian paintings, so it's rather dramatic. Yes, Alan?
And that's, these are both from, I mean, the hills or mountains around Bologna look like that.
Okay. Yeah, the hills around Bologna, according to Ellen, look like this. I think a lot of northern Italy is just really hilly. They built, fortress cities on the top of mountains, and then they fought for centuries between each other. So,
so Lazarus is still lacking color of light. If you look in that picture, he's very white.
yeah, and that's pretty consistent all the way through. Lazarus is dead or was dead, and the color hasn't come back to his face. On one of these paintings, I was able to listen to a wonderful lecture by the curator, actually, of the National Gallery in London. And he said that, it's akin to having bringing someone back to life with CPR. At the beginning, they look all white, and then they come back, and the color returns.
But in the previous one, Lazarus looks more the age of the painter rather than, see his face, how it's not white, his face.
Oh, yeah, that's
The
true.
previous one, the face looks like it's the 1300s time rather than
Yeah,
the Roman time.
yeah,
He doesn't, his face isn't the same as the others.
yeah, well. His face is, this guy is very white. Yeah, but let's move on and look at the chapel itself, because this is. So it makes you really, really want to go to Padua, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This is the Enrico Chapel, and it was attached. It's known as, was dedicated to Santa Maria della Carita. And it was attached to an Augustinian monastery, the Monastero degli Ermitani in Padua, and I'm sure I murdered the Italian, but I did my best.
Will be part of the monastery open to the public.
This is now part of a museum complex in Padua, and yes, you can go visit it.
You mean it's a functional church? It's a church.
I'm not sure if it's a church. It is part of the civic museum complex in the city of Padua. So the city actually owns all these artworks now. So here is the Last Judgment scene. Here are the people descending to hell, and here are the people rising to heaven. Here's Christ in glory with the apostles and the angel choirs above. And the whole chapel is filled with scenes of the life of Mary and Christ on one side, and then the vices and virtues on the other. So you all know about the 7 deadly sins. There are also the 7 Christian virtues. Faith, hope, and charity being amongst them. And so it would be a spectacular place to go.
Is there that much white?
I'm not
In a
sure.
church, I mean, I've noticed the ones I've seen in Italy are dark, fairly dark, but this is lovely.
Yeah, this one does look, looks very much like Saint-Chapelle, which was also done in blue in Paris. In about actually the same time, but that's mostly stained glass. And I don't know if they added artificial lights. This was probably taken by a professional photographer, and then they many times bring in additional lighting to show the artwork. Let's look at the next one. This is a painting by Sebastiano del Piombo at the National Gallery in London. And what are you noticing about this one? There is a lot of movement. We've moved further into the Renaissance. This is later, so there's much more movement. There's also many more people. There are 40 people in this painting, and the artist wanted additional money for the painting because he painted so many people, and they're all different from each other. Sebastiano del Piombo, we'll just call him Sebastiano for ease, was a contemporary of many of the greatest artists of his day. 2 of them would be Michelangelo, and the other would be Raphael. I'm sure you're familiar with those names. This painting was done both by Sebastiano, and then there are at least 2 figures in here that were designed by Michelangelo, because Michelangelo and Sebastiano were in competition with Raphael, who was the greatest better at composition in his day than almost anyone else. And he had been trained in the school in Florence. And in Florence, in the Florentine tradition, you do an actual composition, an actual drawing, full size of the painting. And then that is transferred to the canvas, and then you essentially add the oil paint to it and choose the color gradients. But before Raphael ever started painting, he had a fully complete set of drawings for the painting. And he had probably done a lot of preparatory work to get ready for the final cartoon, is what they're called.
There's a lot more color together.
There is a lot of color, and this is really a bravura showpiece of his ability to use color. And he had been watching Michelangelo do the Sistine Chapel, because Sebastiano and Michelangelo were working together to try to not be outcompeted by Raphael for commissions. They felt very, very threatened that they'd start losing money because Raphael was so good. Sebastiano had seen the ceiling that Michelangelo was painting, the Sistine Chapel. And the Sistine Chapel is full of these bright, vivid almost neon colors. And if you'll notice, all the different greens in here are different gradations. And you can see in her dress that it moves from green to gold to yellow. This is really, or Mary's dress, that's really just a showpiece of his incredible capacity as an oil painter. So if you look closely at this painting, which figures do you think were drawn by Michelangelo? Well, not Jesus,
It's Lazarus.
Lazarus. Michelangelo was famous for creating memorable human figures. And if you'll notice, Lazarus and this gentleman who's unbinding him, they have more defined musculature than anyone else in the painting. And that was really one of Michelangelo's absolute talents. If you've ever seen his nude statue of David, that's a stunningly beautiful young man with some of the best musculature on the planet. So here, these were the figures were drawn by Michelangelo, but then Sebastiano did the painting. What do you notice about the scale of Lazarus versus the scale of the other people in the painting?
About 1.5 times.
He's a little bit larger. He's too large. He doesn't quite fit the scale as everyone else.
He doesn't look like he was ill.
Oh, he doesn't look like he was ill, yeah. Okay, so he's not as white as the other people. But you do see the person unbinding. And this is St. Peter. This, of course, is Jesus. This is Mary. This is Martha, whom Jesus has just sort of rebuked for her lack of faith and trust in him. So she's hiding her face. These are the people over here, holding their noses for the smell. And then there are all these people on the right are the Pharisee group. And all the people on the left are the disciples. Yeah, he's foreshortened. He could have gone wider. We don't have a full 12. But everyone's sort of chit-chatting with each other to talk about what's just happened.
Did they use pink? I mean, I don't remember a pink.
Yeah, the use of pink, we've seen Jesus in pink in a couple other paintings, but it does differentiate him from everyone else in the painting. And pink used to be a color that boys wore. I can't get my husband to wear a pink shirt for love or money, to say nothing of a nice pair of pink shorts to play golf in. Not this side of heaven, but prior to 1900, little boys were usually dressed in pink and little girls in blue, and somehow in there, the colors switched. Yes, Alan?
Well, to make you feel better, the Paris rugby team, their colors are pink and baby blue.
Yeah.
Okay, the Paris rugby colors are pink and baby blue. That sounds good. Well, this painting was commissioned for Narbonne Cathedral in southern France by Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, whose uncle was Pope and who would later become Pope himself as Julius. And he also commissioned Raphael's Transfiguration for this church. He had been made a bishop of this church, given the bishopric, because the Pope, this was Leo, I think Leo X at that time, was trying to heal relations between the Papal States and the Kingdom of France. France and the Papal States didn't always get along very well. And France actually had a very different arrangement in terms of its Catholicity with the Papal States than did the other places. It's much more run by the kings.
You know, I'm having trouble with the light source. It's like they're under the shade of the tree and the lighting is so inconsistent. You look at the gentleman in the background, you can see his forehead very, very effectively. But the face of Christ is very subdued. And down on the ground, you know, the woman is, so that the light is troublesome for me. It's so inconsistent that, you know, but he does it very.
Yeah, the light source in this painting is a problem, and part of that reason is that this painting, after it had been moved to France, they took it off the wood. It had been painted oil on a wood panel. And at some point, they decided that the wood was going to dry out or crack because they were further north. So they did that same kind of technique where they took the painting off the wood and put it on canvas. So this is a heavily damaged Sebastiano painting. There's one in the Hermitage that's in much, much better condition. So if you want to see him at his best, it would be to look online at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. But this is a very interesting painting for his use of color, for the sort of neon tones. It's also very interesting because he borrowed from Raphael in the way that he's using space. So they're telling multiple parts of the story. There's more than one scene here. So what Sebastiano has done is layer it up on a hillside. Right, so that he has more than one plane or more than one area to act out this painting. Yes,
Looks
Mark.
like a river with an aqueduct or a bridge there, right?
Yeah.
Upper south.
Yes,
Pretty cool.
it is very cool. Okay, and so let me complete one thought before we move on. Because Raphael was trained to do everything in a drawing before he started painting. Whereas Sebastiano trained in Venice, and in Venice, they did far more organic works. So he would work out part of the painting on a drawing, and then he would just freehand put the outlines of the people on the painting, and then he'd move on to sort of do the next group. And that was the way people were trained in Venice. So Tintoretto, Titian, all those people who came out of Venice painted in that manner. And that's a contrast with the perfection of the compositions done by Raphael. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll see the Transfiguration by Raphael. Giulio, the cardinal, never sent this painting up to Narbonne, the cathedral in France. He kept the original and had a copy made to send up to Narbonne because he liked this one so much. This is one of the great masterpieces of Western art. And you see the Transfiguration here on the top scene. There are also two scenes in this painting. There's Jesus in the center with Moses and Elijah on either side. As you remember, the disciples flattened to the ground. And then if you remember Pastor John's excellent sermon on the Transfiguration Sunday, you'll know that the next scene in the gospel is the healing of the boy possessed by a demon.
Yeah.
And the disciples are down here trying to heal the boy, but the boy does not get healed until Jesus comes down from the mountaintop. So he's compressed two different scenes into one painting there. So one of the things that I think is interesting about these are the egos of the artists that are involved in these works. This painting is also extraordinarily bittersweet. Because it's the last painting Raphael painted. He was 37, he died very, very suddenly. This painting was first exhibited above his bier in his workshop when people came to pay their respects at the end. It is. Do you see the difference in composition techniques? One of the things that the curator at the National Gallery said in his lecture on the previous painting was that if you took any figure out of a Raphael painting, the whole thing would collapse. Because everyone is so dependent on each other for balance. The form of the painting really depends on everything in sort of its perfect order. But we do have much more drama and movement going on here than we did in the older pieces. You like this painting? You see why Julio kept it and sent it out north? You keep it? I keep it too. Imagine what it's worth.
Yeah.
Right now, it's in the Vatican Museum.
Is it?
Okay. It made a short detour to France during the Napoleonic age, but was eventually returned to Italy and belongs to the Pope now. Anyone have anything more to say about this particular? Okay, well, let's move on to the next one. This is the Van Gogh that I was promising you last week. And this is also, I didn't get my box perfect there on the right side, but this is also a damaged painting. The pigments haven't held up for color and with the same vividness that Van Gogh would have painted them with. What do you notice about this scene? Yes, Kari? Oh, he looks a little, yes. Lazarus does look a little bit like Vincent van Gogh with the red hair and the beard and the whole 9 yards. It is sort of a self-portrait. What about you, Mark?
We've gone from one extreme to the other as far as body shape. I mean, that's just a wisp there compared to the muscular.
Yes, yeah, compared to the muscular, the beautiful musculature of the last Lazarus. We are now here with someone who clearly looks like he was dying.
I'm not sure where Jesus is in this.
Jesus is not in this painting. Well, when we look at the Rembrandt that this one's based on, we'll see where Jesus would be standing. But Jesus is not in this painting. Van Gogh was the oldest son, the oldest living child of a Dutch Reformed minister in Belgium. Excuse me, and his mother was also the daughter of a Dutch Reformed minister. So he came from a very, very clerical family. So he knew the story. So he's sort of taken a religious scene and he's moved it out of a cave and he's put it essentially next to what looked like haystacks, which he's also, famous for. Then he's changed the colors. He's moving along into his life a little bit as an artist, and he's getting more and more bold in terms of his shapes and his use of colors. But we are missing Jesus, but he does come back from the dead. He's, clearly looks dead. He's clearly wrapped up. But he does look different.
So is that Mary and Martha with him?
Yeah, this is Mary and Martha. Mary traditionally is painted with blonde hair and Martha for some reason has brown hair. I have no idea if it's like the Clairol commercial, blondes have more fun. But that's the way it is. I think the immediacy of the expressions on the faces here are wonderful.
Yeah.
Anything else that we're noticing?
The clothing is quite different.
Yeah, the clothing is much more sort of contemporary French peasant, only in much more vivid colors. Because you wouldn't have a bright green dress there if you were actually working a farm, because if you were, the color doesn't stay. You know, anybody knows that deep colors in cotton bleed. If you've ever washed red towels, you know that they're gonna bleed. So it's a very bold representation of what the dresses would be, and the beautiful stripes in Martha's gown, the pink and the green. And then the aqua and the gold is lovely.
The sun or moon? It's
It-
both, but
Yeah, it does look like a sun, yeah. Yeah, let's look at the Rembrandt. We are sort of running out of time that this one's based on. Oh, it is 1106. This is a very dark painting, but here you see how Van Gogh has taken this painting by Rembrandt and then changed up the forms, but it's similar. Here are the sisters. Here's Mary. That's most similar to what the colors, you know, she's wearing a green dress. She's got the blonde hair that Van Gogh was representing. And I think this is Martha. And then there is Jesus. Where's the source of light here? It's on the left. So the light is, you know, in John, we have all the I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. This is part of sort of an I am the resurrection and the life. These are the I am, what we call the I am statements in John about who Jesus is. It's part of the way that he's written his gospel. So here we have the light coming from Jesus, which is the divine light coming down and raising Lazarus from the dead. Yes.
The background looks like stone, looks like rock. And then Lazarus looks like he's actually on church bleachers or pews. I mean, you know, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's
Is he in a tomb or is it a church?
and that I don't know. It does look, you know, here's a sort of a top to this thing for Lazarus and a top over there where Jesus is standing. When my husband and I were in France, we went to all these cathedrals. That was one of our favorite things to do, was to go to cathedrals. And in Rouen, there were endless numbers of these stone sarcophagi in the cathedral. Very, very famous French rulers were buried there. So this could be that kind of thing, but here Jesus is buried in a or Lazarus is horizontal rather than vertical as in the cave. So it's a juxtaposition of how it went in with the other paintings. And Rembrandt is famous, of course, for his use of color or his use of light and the darkness and depth of his paintings. This is an early painting by Rembrandt. We are at a time in Holland where churches are not commissioning art. So this was commissioned most likely for a private patron because the Dutch Reform did not have artworks in their churches. It was quite a different scene. But you do notice the way the light shades in, and there is vivid color in here, and the silver on the swords and scabbards is pretty brilliant as well. But it has a very different feel to it than the Van Gogh.
Well, you're right, it's the only one that's inside, everything else has been outside.
Yeah, and we think we've been suffering here in California without sunshine, but Holland really suffers in the winter. without sunshine. So thank you so very much. I'll be back next week, and next week I have a few surprises for you. Christianity is a global church, and we have more global art coming next week.